welcome to this episode 245 of Schraman Reference. You're about to drop into a conversation between me, Kenny McMillan, and my guest, James Laxton, ASC, DP of Beef Season 2. Enjoy. I mean, off rip, the first thing I noticed about it was just, it all kind of happened at once in my head. So like, I was just allowed to play with Fujifilm's new Eterna camera.
Yeah, and, you're ahead of me. I had not had the chance, but yeah, cool. That's awesome.
I think they only have 2 of them.
Okay.
Like to like rent to people,
yeah.
to like if you call the people, I think there's 2 or 3. And
wow.
Because I had it. I had to send it in. They were going to let me borrow it for a doc. Yeah. And then they were like, hey, we need it back. I sent it back. And then my friend Joey texts me and goes, hey, I've got this Eterna. Didn't you just have it? And I was like, wait, where'd you get it? And he goes, this place in New York. And I was like, that's the one I just sent back. Son of a bitch. Like it went to New York and then came straight back to I could have just driven
it back down to you. Yeah, exactly. That's very funny. That's very funny. Oh, wow. How'd you find it? Was it cool?
I loved it. I had like a few little minor gripes, but they're very workflowy. The image is incredible and stuff. But one thing I noticed about Beef was it looked, I've just had to accept I'm a large format guy. I like big sensor. I don't, it's not necessarily the blurriness. You know, everyone gets real excited about shallow depth of field. Yeah. It's not necessarily that, but there is kind of a spatial thing. But a buddy of mine was asking, did you shoot that on Alexa 65? Was it the 265? Was it IMAX? What was the deal?
Yeah, so we were the first people out the gate to be able to get our hands on the Alexa 265. So that just, I talked to Ari about that camera coming out a few months earlier and had sort of, known this project may come about in the fall and it was, no, not fall, sorry, the winter and sort of the timing sort of makes sense. And was also able to sort of talk to the showrunner, Sunny, about like why it felt like it might make sense for the show. And after a lot of back and forth and testing and things like that, it did feel like in the end it worked. So we went with it. But yeah, we were like, I mean, it was a little nail biting in terms of getting it for day one, but it ended up happening, which is amazing. And Ari really, credit to them, made it happen for us. But so it was a 265 for us. It was my first time, for anybody's first time using that camera, which is always a bit of a sort of nervous thing as you go into a project like that you care about deeply and et cetera, like, is this going to work? And, you hear stories about bugs and things breaking and blah, 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 blah. I think we had to restart the camera once in all of the weeks we had it. So it was, it was great. And it didn't have a fuss about it at all, which is amazing.
Yeah. Was there a specific reason to shoot? Are you just like me? You're like, it's bigger, better. Or was there like a secret narrative reason you could lie about?
Yeah, exactly. No, there are. I try not to do too much of it. I mean, it's funny. Like I'm not to rattle on about too many things, but like, I tend to try to use different things on different projects. I'm not the like, oh, these are my lenses guy. I only shoot on these things, or this is my sensor thing. I'm only shooting. I do tend to go airy for a while now. As opposed to other camera manufacturers and sort of sensor and color science stuff. So I am sort of in that way, I guess I do sort of follow that path. But in terms of lenses and what format we're using within the area sort of color science stuff, I do sort of vary actually. But to me, sometimes you can sort of make the theoretical argument for things, and does it really make sense or not is obviously up to debate. But there were some theoretical ideas about why it made sense for us, and it really stemmed from the writing of the show and the stories we were talking about with Sunny, the showrunner, about like his interest in telling these very kind of big topic stuff, like very sort of generational topic things. And, as you watch the show, it sort of evolves into different parts of characters' lives and generational topics and things. So what I sort of felt like when I was hearing somebody talk about these concepts was, gosh, these are like really, big human discussions about, what our lives are all about. And these characters almost want to be sort of stand-ins, for these generations and how they find love and how they communicate and things like that. And so to me, it felt like it wasn't while at the same time it was like a character study, it wasn't like slice of life stuff. It was like big things being discussed, and these characters wanted to like stand in and be almost symbols for their generations in a way. And so when I thought about that, I just thought, gosh, well, I want to make sure I'm presenting these characters in a way that makes them feel powerful and or makes them feel bigger in a way, and makes them on screen feel like they're not just the sort of classical slice of life kind of filmmaking we want. We want it to be more presentational in a way. So all those sort of things led me to feel like, not even just large format, but like a very big large format as we could. Of course, now there are technically some bigger formats around if you go into sort of the film sort of world. But in terms of digital filmmaking at the time, anyway, it was the biggest we could choose, and it seemed to make sense in that way. So it was about that. It was kind of about like portraying these characters when you're in a portrait close up or in a medium shot, and making them feel like the impact of how the audience might receive them from the screen might make them feel like they carry a different weight with them.
Yeah. Well, and on either side of the like practicality versus image thing, like you've got a lot of discussions, which larger format makes just a talking head look nice.
Sure.
But then also with the 265, it's not like that big honking.
Yeah.
65, it's not an IMAX camera. It's normal. It's a normal camera. It's not really. I can't imagine it was a difficult thing to slot into the workflow.
No,
yeah, for AC sometimes.
There's some sort of idiosyncratic things about them that are positive and negative depending on how you look at them. I like for example, the rear NDs. Like some people don't like that. I happen to think they're great. I love the fact that I'm not dealing with like multiple glass in front of the lens that might cause different reflections and things like that. So that back flap opening where you can sort of insert these things, I think is really cool. I think it's really fast as well. Like, opening, take the matte box off to take a tray out and do the funny thing with your hands as you put them in the tray and put them back in. Like there's something quite like effortless about how those go in and out. You can do some, we didn't really do it on the show, but you can do some fun, weird kind of old school effects by leaving the flap open and putting a flashlight in there. There's all kinds of fun things you can do with that thing, the opening that, as a DP I'm a fan of. I mean, there's some downsides to it. Like if your build is a certain way, the access to that port and slot can be funky. So like as your APC builds it, and if you're on a Ronin or something weird like that, how you're still opening that slot is interesting. But as long as you're sort of cognizant of those things, it's I think more positive than negative actually. But yeah, what you touched on before is true. Like, it like the things that we're all used to, especially in the speed of television and sort of what your schedule looks like, and also like the tools that you might be using. In a scene, we oftentimes go from studio mode to Steadicam, and sometimes even within a scene go to handheld. And if you're building it right, your transfer times between these sort of tools can be much faster than if we were using the classic 65 one, and not to mention the Steadicam guys' lower back issues, things like that. So I find it to be a really great tool. I was really impressed by it. Talk about the color science forever, but like the color science in that camera I find to be really beautiful, and the latitude, et cetera. So anyway, not to make an area commercial, I don't want to do that, but I did.
I've already done it before. Don't worry.
I do find the camera to be
Art
cool.
Adams and Chase Hagen on before, so they got their time.
Funny. Okay, yeah.
But
anyway, cool. But yeah, no, I found it to be useful.
Well, kind of on a more meta scale, I suppose. Something that I've found interesting in the now the audience is a lot louder, I suppose. You normally would only hear from people in your sphere about something, but now with the internet, everyone has an opinion. And in my line of, doing this podcast and just working and stuff and being, in my mid late 30s, I'm on the internet.
Don't say the actual number.
Yeah. And it is interesting to see how audience taste has changed with not only with the idea of AI, not even the advent of AI, but just the idea, but also the sort of perfection and stuff. all that is to say, the perfection of images, or the potential, for a while there was a lot of like, oh, let's put filters on the thing to knock down the digital sharpness or whatever.
Sure.
And all that is to say, do you find, not specifically with this show, but just kind of in your work, that there is a push towards kind of maximalizing the image to stand out? Obviously we've got Nolan shooting a movie completely on IMAX, which is both rad as a DP, but also is a bit of spectacle, junky stuff, which does get butts and seats, this division, et cetera, stuff like that.
Yeah. It's a reason to it's a marketing ploy as well as it is is a technique. Yeah, sure. Agreed. Yeah. How do I find that? Is that true or not? Is that kind of your question? I do think that some truth.
Do you find it on your end? Because obviously the marketing department wants that, but like when you're having these discussions about shooting film, shooting television shows, like, is there a oh, we should shoot large format, we should shoot these wacky, I don't know, pets fall anamorphics to get people to lock in,
I hear you. Sorry, the no is the short answer. I mean, the chats I'm having with directors and collaborators, producers, etc. I think, and maybe it's just the world that I work in and the people I'm around. I think just not to be too naive, but the chats I'm having are just generally about making the show good. And I think the goals are really much more simplistic than that, and then the narratives behind them that sort of start to churn as you go into sort of talking about the show, et cetera, and presenting the show and the show coming out. Those are sort of different in a way, and I think I think you can, I think audiences are pretty savvy at this point. They can smell that out pretty quickly. I think, what is a talking point and what is a genuine sort of attempt at expressing oneself. I hope that's true anyway. I think, it seems pretty obvious to me anyway.
No, I think it is. I mean, truly the meta-analysis about the question about meta-analysis is just that, like, I think people are very savvy, and then there's kind of a Dunning-Kruger effect of like, well, clearly they did this. Not that I've seen this conversation about beef. I'm just going off of the large format, shooting large format. Because to shoot Alexa 65 on a television show, even 4 years ago, would have been crazy. And now it's just an option.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think the way I talked about it a minute ago about why we chose it, as an example, as a counterpoint to what, the narratives around these things can sort of be defined by, if I'm making like a sort of docu film that's really like a character study that's like slice of life, like Marty Supreme in Alexa 65 or Large Format would be weird as a good example to me. That's like, to me, the choices that Darius and those guys made on that show, on that film, I think we're perfect, and I think that show's great, and I think that film is fantastic, and the visual choices behind it about why film and not something large format, to me, were made perfect sense. I think that show would be strange if it was on IMAX. It would be pretty weird. So there's just reasons behind some of these things, as my point ultimately. And, some choices make sense for others, and some shows are right on 16 mil. And that's why that makes sense for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the other side of the coin, is people who will go like, shooting film is now a gimmick. Shooting, it's like, I'm basically with various guests trying to trick them into saying what I want them to say, because I already know the answer. And it's like, it's just let it go, guys. Just watch the film, please.
Yeah. Well, I think what I would hope happens at some point, and I think I honestly genuinely would say, I think we're probably close to that point now, is that because it's like we've eaten ourselves a few times here with like the discussions about formats and what makes the most sense and what's popular, et cetera, and what is a standout thing. And that's, I can sort of go off on a tangent about that in a second too, about style and cinematography style and things like that. Is that I think we've eaten ourselves so much that maybe at some point it won't matter, and we'll be bored of these conversations, and there's just going to be a genuine discussion about like that was a great choice for what that material wanted from you, and the way you worked with the director about with that format clearly made sense and just clicked, you know, so, I think that's true. That hopefully that these conversations about, shooting film is in vogue, and if you want to be like a hip filmmaker, that you're clearly going to have a vintage lens discussion at some point. That kind of stuff.
I mean, what was it? The K35 era. There was the Cook on a Mini era. There's all kinds of era. I did. Moving off of camera, I didn't mean to get stuck on cameras for so long.
No. All right.
Am I right in having read that there was kind of a, I guess they called it a seasonal color architecture for the various. I was wondering if you could walk me through that, because there are like, it's not that the show has like drastically different looks, but there are some definite like spaces that they live in that all feel unified but very unique in their own way, especially with some of the lighting.
Yeah. So, I mean, like all things, starts in the script, and the ideas that Sunny was sort of talking about in pre-production about these characters, I said before, just like kind of being stand-ins for generations, and the cycles of life, and how love changes as you cycle through these things, and relationships evolve from being young and in love, and just and then you become older, and how your love changes with your partner. And so that all these discussions sort of spoke to this cycle, and one big cycle in our life, of course, is the seasons. And so the idea came about trying to portray each of these kind of eras of love within a certain season of their love. And as the obvious is, you probably can tell already, you have the sort of the Austin and Ashley being the young couple, and their season is spring, and they're in love, and the beginning of the show, and everything is glorious, and flowers are blooming, etc. Summertime in the show is primarily like presented as like what the club is in summer. It's this endless summer of like continuous Southern California sunshine, and the warm hues of sun are blasting through those windows at all cost. And we try to maintain that as much as we possibly could. And you have Josh and Lindsay, which is is autumn, and that their love is sort of crumbling and dying off. And then you have Sharon Park and her husband, the doctor, and he is like they're in the winter stages of their lives, and they're like what love is like as you get to that part of your cycle of life. And I think so, like that these sort of seasons started to want to be portrayed in certain ways, and you had our production designer, Grace Yen, and our costume designer, Olga, all kind of like working towards maintaining this idea throughout each of our disciplines. And for me, that meant, of course, as I was already sort of talked about, summer, with a club and the sunlight coming through there. As the counterpoint, there's, of course, the winter light of the chairwoman's, storylines, and that sort of icy blues that sort of permeate through her domains and whatnot. And, as an example, outside of her house, even in the sort of beautiful Southern California sort of coastline, is actually like dark clouds, and we kind of suck the color out of those in the DI to kind of make sure that the kind of that sort of cooler, darker, sort of all knowing, all manipulating kind of like character that she might be, was portrayed a certain way. And then, of course, you have sort of Ashley and Austin being this sort of pastel, and kind of there's a soft light to them. The soft light both for the autumn and spring in a way, but it's sort of these different kind of tones of sort of the autumnal, warm oranges and stuff for the fall, and sort of bluey, sort of yellowy pastel colors. And so we, tried our best to sort of make lighting choices like this, and then, came to the DI stages, of course, started pushing color into certain places and taking color out of certain places, and what colors would get emphasized for which seasons someone might be in. So we played as close attention to that as we possibly could, and I think, to hopefully good effect. But that was the idea behind them. And, because like I said, the show is all about these concepts, and, trying to maintain what emphasizing we can do within our disciplines to sort of push those things along.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I also noticed too, when you're talking about like these big concepts and stuff, just it was the difference between this and the first season. And I was wondering if there was any discussion, or what the discussion was about making a second season that it's not, doesn't really have anything to do with the, I guess, source material. I don't know what you would, or was it just like, hey, we're doing our own thing. Thanks for the title.
Yeah, and I mean, the hope was we didn't do that. I mean, I definitely talked to Sonny a lot in pre-production. In our first meeting, we talked about this actually, but when I first met him for the first time, was to sort of make sure that we were going to make a show's language sort of, come from a very foundational place about what is that beef visual language. And then, of course, deviate from there and start to, make it about what season 2 is about, as we already sort of discussed. But there did want to be a significant time attention paid towards what seemed to sort of work well for season 1 and in terms of how the story was told visually speaking, of course, and sort of maintaining that through season 2. And I think we did. I mean, a lot of discussions about like perspective driven stuff. I mean, so much about both seasons is sort of about which character you're identifying with and who you're feeling connected to as an audience member and whose scene is it, and those kind of concepts, really are important, very, very important for Sonny and his filmmaking voice. And so, these concepts sort of maintained through season 2's visual language as well, and that had to do with a lot about like what lens you're on for whose scene it is and whose scene it is not, and how you're seeing them over the shoulder of someone and clean on the other side, and all these kind of choices about how to sort of emphasize perspective, because the show is about like so much of like how the show's writing works to me is so well done in a way that like you kind of you're identifying with a certain character through a scene in a way that really puts you in the perspective. And I think the hope is that the cinematography can aid in that process as an audience kind of connects with one character or another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The, were you doing any like, I was about to say fancy, it's not fancy, but just, like lens per character type thing, or was it all one unified lens set?
Yeah, good question. No, it's all one unified lens set. I guess we would sort of like the thing we would do differently, and maybe I should elaborate on it a little bit because I touched on it a second ago, but was like how we would define perspective. We would like, if it's a scene that really Charles, Austin's character, Charles's character is, it's his scene in the show. And let's say we want to make sure our audience is like connecting with him, very often if there was a master, it would probably, be taken from a perspective that would be more from his side of the room. And then when it's a close-up, it would be probably a clean close-up that didn't include the shoulder of the other character. And you're probably going to be proximity-wise closer physically with Charles in that moment. And then when it's, you turn around for the reverse coverage, you're over the shoulder of Charles looking back at, say, Kaylee, and that's going to include a shoulder over. So you're just kind of tying these perspective things in, and that kind of stuff we did a lot. And that's sort of, we would call it like the rubric of sort of how we would sort of make sure we were maintaining this sort of beef language. And that these are things that lots of filmmakers do. I certainly don't intend to imply that like there's any sort of thing that like
magic secret sauce.
Lots of people do this. But it was a way in which it was one of the ways in which we made sure that like some of the foundational elements of the beef visual language was going to maintain through the seasons. Is more why I'm saying it this way.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there, there's not, unless something happens in the second half of the season where a house blows up or something, relatively,
you never know.
Yeah, never know. Well, someone knows, someone who actually finished the fucking season. But relatively simple setups and stuff. We're just looking at people chatting and whatnot.
Sure.
Were there any unique challenges that you would run into with that, or does that allow you to like? Because like even the lighting is not super. Well, not always. I'm thinking like especially at night. I really enjoy some of those interior, I love top light. There's some really good, there's some good top light happening, but it all seems very like manageable when I'm looking at it. I'm like, yeah, I guess if I had the lighting plot, I could figure it out. Not saying I can do what you do, but
no, not to me. Yeah.
Challenges.
It's natural. It's simple. It's not like we're not
heightened realism,
stylistically crazy filmmakers. And yeah, I agree. That is not the voice of what we're intending to do, of course. With the challenges to that, I mean, sure. in a way, like being a filmmaker that isn't interested in, in this, and I'm just speaking about this season and this show particularly, isn't interested particularly in like hyper stylized stuff. You still, it's almost like you're naked a little bit. There isn't like, oh, I'm not going to just do some tricky stuff here and like disguise, my inability to make good stuff. In a way, when you get simple, you sort of sometimes, if you're not doing your job well, you can fall into some traps. And so, the hope in a way was that our work was going to maintain some precision and some delicacy and some, really deft craft from, all the different departments, of course, hands here. And I think the hope is that we did that. Yeah. I mean, another reason why I really like the large format stuff, and specifically the 65 stuff, is because you can sort of let things sit in a way that, because of how the perspective by which you see a master shot or a medium shot, I find myself anyway, and people can debate me. I'm sure there's plenty of film cinematographers that would debate me about this point, but for me, it works this way. And that is that, like, I feel like I can watch and sit on a large format medium shot longer and have my attention still be drilled in to that imagery. And while that maybe that's to do with the depth of field and how the character might sit separated from the background a bit more, there's all kinds of ways in which that comes to pass, but I bring that up just to sort of touch on how some of the simplicities I think work quite well for us in a way because of that 65 size format for me, that like is a great tool when you're looking to sort of really just sit with a scene. And when I read the script, that's kind of a feeling that I had that I sensed would be a goal for this season too, that like maybe it sits and masters more. And I think we did some of that. Not every scene of course does, but there's a lot more, there's a lot of that stuff in this season that I'm really proud of in a way. There's shots that are kind of this kind of iconography that sort of can, present the material so much with a single image. And yeah, you could shoot that shot on any format, but I feel like it sits with more structure and more foundational presence in a way because of the format.
Yeah. Well, and it's something that I've noticed, just to your point about the larger formats, is space feels more spatial, I guess. Like there's a difference
3D.
Between
Yeah.
And I know that there's going to be, I've been able to interview like Steve Yedlin and stuff like that, and I'm like just nerdy enough where he was proud of me, which made me happy, but not nerdy enough that like I know I'm going to say something and he's going to text me and be like, "No, you're wrong. 3D pop isn't a thing."
Yeah.
It's like,
it's so funny. No, I mean I know he would debate me on the point I just mentioned as an example. Like that's not his. He thinks very differently about this stuff than I do. I am confused about his perspective, but I know he can explain it in a technical way. But I just don't know that. I just don't agree. That's my point. I mean, some of the reasons by which he expresses himself are not complete in my mind, but I respect him obviously immensely.
I think his point, I don't want to speak for him, but it seems like at anything, it basically, from what I gather and having like read all of his stuff he's written out and spoken to him, is like anything technically is possible. Yes. Like there's no given, like saying, oh, large format does this and saying that it's inherent to a sensor size is a misnomer. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah. But that's technical. Like if once, like to have to think about that while going into pre-production is annoying and weird. Unless you're smart like you, I'd rather just be like big sensors, lens looks good where I put camera normally.
Right. Well, because I mean, it's all No, it's like, 'cause it's all about depth of field and focal length and all these different things. And I think he views it as like a field of view conversation. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. But like you're maybe, I mean, not to get into the debate of Steve, not to debate Steve Yedlin without his presence, because I'm sure he would
without him being here. Yeah.
Because he would do a much better job presenting his argument than I ever could, of course. But my feeling generally about it, if I can just take 2 seconds to explain it, is that like, in in a scene in like a night interior, your f-stop, if you're gonna generally be using incandescent lamp sources without changing them to be some different wattage in a crazy way and having full control over X, Y, and Z, you're largely dealing with some things that are probably going to put you at a stop of 2 or 2.8. Let's just say somewhere in there. For example, if you're dealing with the kind of ISO sensor sizes ISO sensitivities that a lot of our cameras are working at. And a 2.8 on a 65 size sensor on a 24 mil lens is different depth of field than it is on a 30 super 35 size sensor. We all know this. This is kind of the stating the obvious here. And while he might say, yes, but you could change the depth of field to be a 1 or something like that, or a 0.5 to match it on a super 35 size sensor, that's not how real life works. That's just, that isn't how.
To clarify for you, just so that you don't get angry comments, it's this. No matter what lens, no matter what sensor you put behind a 24 millimeter, the depth of field's always going to be the same. It's where the camera is, and if you're on a 24, the camera is going to be on a super big sensor. The camera's going to be closer.
From subject. Yeah, exactly. Therefore, it is what it is. Yes, exactly. Sorry. Yeah, that is a very
but that was. But you just said what my point was earlier, which is that it's to have to explain. Oh, by that I mean the distance close. Like at a certain point, your shorthand becomes longhand if you have to constantly. Editorialize what you're talking about.
My point is ultimately that, like, yes, he's right technically that, like, those things are all true and you can do all those things, but you just don't do them because you're on a different camera. And that's just the reality of some of these choices that you put yourself in when you're shooting. Like maybe you don't have the ability to like pull the wall on a set
in a car.
In a car, whatever these situations might be, there are some realities to our world that we exist in, and not everything is just the ability to like crunch the number to find a way to get the same sort of perspective on something.
Yeah, that did.
Anyway, that's just my feeling.
No, and I agree, but I just said something that now I'm like, oh yeah, which is you have been working with Barry Jenkins forever, right?
True.
I imagine y'all have a shorthand. When you get on set, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
But what's her name? Lee? Is the
yes, yeah, Lee, yeah. We call him Sonny. The people
Sonny.
that collaborate, yeah. But anyway.
So Sonny's a new collaborator. How did you adapt to the way they spoke with you, and also not literally spoke with you, but like how the collaboration worked? And was there anything that you took from kind of your previous work and were like, this is how I go, or are you more chameleonistic?
Yeah, I definitely, I think as a DP such as yourself, you do try to be chameleonistic as much as you can. I mean, I do anyway. I think there probably are some cinematographers that just go like, this is my thing. I do this thing. I show up and do this thing. And if you've hired me, you like the thing I do. So I'm just going to do the thing. And that's not really how I work. So while, I have had I have this other, a different relationship with Barry than I would with Sonny. And because of that, I'm being I want to be respectful of the new relationship and start afresh in a way. And so while inevitably I'm bringing all my experience to everything I'm doing, I'm certainly trying my best to sort of start collaborating in a way that works for him and worked for him. And, I'm definitely like, they're probably all, they're very different filmmakers, first of all, but there are quite a few similarities in terms of like, we just talked about like perspective a little bit, and both of them I think are very perspective driven filmmakers. And that's why sort of some of the early conversations about how to just make sure that we're paying close attention to where the camera is as it relates to who we're with in the scene, all that stuff really felt like, conversations I've had for a long time. So there were some similarities and some differences between the two of them, but even though they're, like I said, incredibly different filmmakers, there's some sort of structural things that are quite similar actually in how they collaborate.
Yeah. This is a wild left turn. Was Moonlight as impactful for your not career, but your like the way that you worked as it was for all of us looking in, like, oh, that movie was huge. Did from your operationally, was that different for you? Like, did you do something different, or was it the story and just the? You know, because my buddy just won an Oscar, and he just he was like, "We just made the thing, dude. I don't know."
Oh, go, congrats. I mean, yeah. I mean, you know, I think, I mean, are you asking sort of like what I felt like on the day? Like, was I doing things in Miami different? No, certainly not.
Did you feel like you were on a heater, you know?
I think the truth is we thought we made a good movie. I think we probably, I think I've said this before in interviews in the past, like, I think we probably thought, gosh, that was great. Made a strong film. Maybe it goes to Sundance. Maybe someone picks it up. Maybe like those things happen. But that was sort of like, at least in my mind, some of the goals I was having as we wrapped the production. So yeah, I think I felt very proud. I knew it made something that, like, whether it hit or didn't, I felt proud of. And but yeah, no, I mean, that movie is, I can say a lot of things about it, but it helped me in so many ways about sort of putting things in perspective for me about what goals I have for myself and how to think about success in a way, that was, we were sort of youngish when that happened, and to have that attention being given to us at a time where we're just in our minds still beginning our careers is a sort of a weird experience, if I'm being honest. And it was like it sort of taught me some lessons about, success or lack thereof when it doesn't work out, and how to still maintain the perspectives of what's important to you. Because what happened is ultimately,
nothing.
How do I say this? Nothing happened in the end.
Yeah. That's what I've heard from everyone.
You're left with yourself, and what you come to understand is that you are the guiding light within your own journey, and what makes sense for you is what makes sense for you. And when it's, when you win, like, best son award from your mom at Thanksgiving dinner or the Oscar, it's like, like these things actually have to mean the same to you in the end. It's like you can't let the other things tell you why it's like, why you're so good or why you're not good, because sometimes you won't be good. Like sometimes no one's going to care. And I felt like what that process taught me was, you have to, what matters to you is what matters to you, and not the other parts of this journey. That can be nice, and we all like to be told we did a good job, but ultimately it can't like take over from why you make choices,
Yeah. Well, you actually threaded that needle perfectly, because where I was headed with that whole thing was just the idea of, it's like, what's that game, like Code Breaker, or where you've got like the different colors, then you'll put the colors in a line and it'll tell you like, oh, 2 colors are correct, one of them's in the right place.
I know the game, but I played the game, but I don't know the name of it.
Yeah. You do it with numbers, whatever.
Sure.
I imagine that getting an award or having large critical success or public success feels like that game where you're like, which is the peg in the right place? Did I do? Because it's not like, okay, just repeat everything I did on that last film, shoot it the same way, I'm guaranteed another win. The game changes every single time.
Yeah. Which is the beauty and the fun of it. It would be really weird if it wasn't that way. I mean, so yeah, like it's, you got to pick yourself up and do it again and again and again. And I think what you take from that is the journey is the fun bit, and not to get too esoterical and bizarre here in the conversations, but like, that has to,
you're
matter
allowed
more.
to, like I said, that's this show.
that has to matter more at the end of the day. Cause there will be times where, and it's happened to me certainly before, like where it doesn't work. And I sometimes feel like some of the things I'm most proudest of are things that someone else would say, like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's not the good one or whatever. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. But anyway, that like, I guess to answer your 2 questions ago, no, I didn't do anything different on Moonlight. I think that was just us sort of trying to maintain our voices and it's always amazing when someone says, well done.
Yeah. Because in the commercial world, I feel like it's different, right? When you make a commercial and it's like, if you turn on I guess no one watches television, but you turn on your streamer, it cuts to the breaks and it's like every ad looks, there's always like that wild push in on the wide to open, and then there's like the streak of light coming in, the kind of very the probe lens. We got to have the probe lens. There's like a formula to that where you get rewarded for doing that same thing. If you were to do that in narrative, you would be shot.
100%. Yeah, it's weird, I mean, but there are some carryovers though that we can touch on too in terms of that kind of sometimes approach. Like, I do have this talking about the awards thing. There's a challenge here, and I think it's hard to. There's some human instinctual stuff going on with like how awards-driven things function, and I know here I am talking about this on a podcast that's like obviously there's awards and why we're doing these discussions are part of it sometimes, but like we are like sometimes rewarded for being stylistic. Like a thing that stands out is something that is discussed. And if you don't stand out, from the pack, like how do you find attention and how does your career sort of make sense? And I remember having these discussions, when I first started being a cinematographer way back when, years and years before Moonlight. Seeing colleagues of mine, find success and faster than me, and I was like, oh gosh, it says how do I like make sense of that in my mind? And I was trying to still maintain like the Deacon's philosophy of something where like sometimes you should not be the thing that's in your face, and it should not be the talking point. It should not be in the magazines and being discussed as like the cinematography on this movie is the best thing in the world. And like I believed in that. I still do believe in that. The only, like Moonlight got some awards of attention because it was stylistic in a way, but that style seemed to sort of suit the story, which is why it felt that way. And again, if you go to like Barry Lyndon's next film, If Beale Street Could Talk, like it's a very different looking movie, and it's because that aesthetic seemed to make sense for that film for us. And if we had placed the Moonlight aesthetic onto that story, it would have been ridiculous. And there's things that just make sense for certain things, and sort of just how attention works within our industry. Yeah, like the style, the biggest voice, the loudest voice sometimes is the thing that people sort of, present as like, this is good, I guess, because it was sort of, it's easy to talk about. The thing that like if you can talk about your cinematography in a film or a TV show that in like 2 sentences in a way that is a good headline, sometimes that can, be successful. But if you have to talk about it for an hour and a half for people to understand what you did in your job, that's maybe something that actually could be incredible, but maybe doesn't sort of, lend itself to some of these sort of different parts of our industry.
Yeah. Well, and you, earlier when you were saying like, oh, this show that, that it kind of left you a little naked because it is just like a heightened realism situation and not like a stylized, it's mildly stylized. I think it looks stylish and maybe not stylized, but it looks, it carries quality.
It hopefully
with it.
Has a voice still. I mean, I definitely feel like we were trying to make it have a specific voice and a specific look and make very critical choices and make very specific choices. It's not random. And there is a style to it, and it's it's a different thing than maybe like other people might. It's not like commercial driven in that sense. If that's what might sort of be easy to describe it in that way too. Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't ask this like up front. Were there any kind of references for the show? Like where you're like, oh, we're kind of leaning, or was it more just those kind of core ideas of, like you were saying, like seasons and sort of monolithic ideas?
There's lots of filmmakers there's lots of filmmakers that like, I guess we sort of talked about and other references too. But, like Ruben Östlund's films, Triangle Sadness kind of stuff and The Square and all of his films, I think. Movies. yeah, exactly. Like that.
The Circle Rouge
voice was something that felt like akin to the kind of visual language that made sense for us. And I think there's a kinship to that filmmaker's voice to ours in my mind anyway, which is he's sort of touching on these are sort of societal archetypes. And sort of diagnosing so societal and human instincts, and why they occur. And I think I thought about that a lot anyway in the the pre-production and production of the show too, just sort of finding frames that would, sort of allow the audience to sort of almost like analytically analyze, something that is emotional, but not just like, sometimes not just be like, oh, in the character's perspective all the time, but pop out for these sort of, I would almost call them tableaus, where like you kind of see the character in their depressing sort of, a dark, dreary office underground for Josh and his thing. And there's a shot that kind of starts in a kind of medium close of him. It pulls out wide through his doorway, and you can sort of frames the hallway and the office in general in a way that kind of like is a bit oppressive towards him. And frames like that like, kind of like touch on more than just perspective driven filmmaking, but also something that feels a little bit like analytical as well.
Yeah, more sort of, I guess I got to stop name dropping him because it's just every fucking episode, but like Fincherian kind of observational,
sure,
more classical frames where it's not like, we're not going high crazy. It's like you're saying, it's middle of the frame, locked off. Not locked, but.
Yeah, there's a lot of that too. Yeah, I mean, I think we could go on and on about who our favorites are, but yeah, I mean, like Fincher's up there for sure, and I'm sure even if it's not consciously, subconsciously, there's some sort of some things in the show that like do sort of pay homage to that kind of filmmaking anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to find new. Unfortunately, I grew up just a regular ass teen boy, so all the like. It was The Matrix and Fight Club and Men in Black and shit. And I was just like, that's my stuff. So all my influences are basic.
Those
I shouldn't say basic. I should say common.
Those are all good movies. Those are all good movies.
Yeah.
Those are all great films. There's no shame in that as well. I think like, yeah, no, don't worry. I think it's going to Barry Jenkins. Barry talks about it. One of his favorite movies is all time is Die Hard. It's like, these sometimes these indie filmmakers are like, people think of them as like, oh, their favorite film is some Criterion Collection movie, but in actual fact, sometimes it's not the case.
I gotta tell you, this whole from here up all the way, or that way, all Criterions, because at one point I was like, I should know more.
And
I just knew they had all the good special features, so I was like, maybe I won't be a fucking idiot. I probably should have done this in college, but whatever.
It sounds like it's worked out. It sounds like it's
my mid-20s. Well, yeah, now like the documentaries I was telling you about earlier, the director is very much that guy.
Sure.
He'll literally, he doesn't listen to this, I know that for a fact, so I'll just say it. And even if he does, fuck you, Dylan. But he, like, at one point he was like, can we make this again? This is documentary and I don't have a lighting. It's just me with a camera. Yeah. And he goes, can we make this more like Gordon Willis?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, dude. Sure. It's noon. No.
That's tough. Well, but Gordon Willis was famous for like using one light and just a little light bulb. That's how he would just do all, it's part of a docu package.
But that's what I'm saying. We were outdoors at noon, not indoors with a light bulb,
I hear you. Yeah.
That actually, I'm jumping ahead in my head, but it makes sense. Have you ever run into an issue where your director wants something out of your image that technically is a bad idea? Mm-hmm. Like I know that one example was Roger Deakins was talking. I think it was Deakins was saying how either he or someone he knew had a monitor that they would turn way down so that he'd stop telling him to underexpose the image so much because he knew it would just ruin it and they wouldn't get that. Like, have you run into situations like that where your technical brain has to outweigh your emotional brain? Because emotionally correct usually is the right answer.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I mean, I don't know if I genuinely have. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. I'm sure I am. But like the kind of filmmaker that I am and the kind of collaborator I am, like if someone shouts out something like that to me, and there's the first thing I think about is like, oh, there's something wrong with the choice I've made somewhere that they're making that comment. Like there's something inherently like, it's not like it's technically like, oh gosh, like, like what am I going to do about this issue because I don't want to mess something up, in a technical way that I'll regret. It's more like there's probably a conceptual issue that's happened that I have not paid attention to that they're looking for, and I probably need to solve that issue more than I mean to solve like turning down the monitor or turning up the monitor or something like that. There's more like a conceptual, like deep down foundational topic that I've somehow missed. Is usually where my head goes when I hear a comment like that, because it just means I'm not really in sync with that filmmaker in a way. Like there's something I'm not really like, I've not paid enough attention to what matters to them. And I usually step back and think about that is my first response, to be honest with you, when I come up against questions like that, because they do come up, of course. But that's usually my first reaction is like, what have I missed? What have I missed in terms of like the request here? Because I've clearly missed something. And then 9 times out of 10, I'll usually try to like do the thing they're asking, actually. Because what I find in my own journey and what in my own process is like, it's something that like I usually figure out on the pathway to fixing the issue they have found, have an issue with something. I usually find a better idea somewhere about what to do differently. And so I like that journey more than I like, let me preserve some sort of technical thing that I'm worried about later on. Because I think usually the creative journey of that process I find just more interesting, more fun anyway. So that's kind of 9 times out of 10 my response. I mean, listen, if they say like, hey, can you just like, make that a little bit brighter or make it a little bit darker? Like, yeah, I'll just maybe just adjust something very simply. But if the request is like deeply, there's something more inherently wrong with something, it's usually like I've missed something along the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like
usually, yeah.
No, that's a phenomenal answer, because also it speaks to the idea of like if I mean, you basically already said it, but it's probably not just that one thing that's wrong. You're probably not conceptualizing a larger idea this is just one example of what will probably be more problems down the line.
Kind of, yeah.
So it's like a flag to like recalibrate. Yes.
Like kind of pump the brakes and go like, oof, yes, I can do that for you. What really is guiding you right now? Because that might be more important to make sure I don't do this a few more times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On Beef, you don't, like we said, it's not very maximalistic at all, but there's like some interesting stuff. Like at one point, I think there's like a dolly handoff to like handheld. Sure. There's some fun stuff happening. Was there anything that you knew going into the show that you guys discussed that you were like, the show is not this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting because we didn't really build the show from that point, but I'm sure there very much are, of course. I mean, I think like, it's interesting, I think like, I'll give you an example. I started, this idea of, finding frames that would, along the lines I said before, they kind of, trope-ish sort of iconography of like wide shots that sort of maintain this sort of meaningful frame that you can sit on. But I started doing them quite like high angle at first. And very quickly in that first setup, there was a sort of a balk at that idea, and it felt right away wrong for all of us. Maybe I was a little late to the party, but for everyone else. And then I realized what it was which was like, it was just too like observational. It wasn't perspective enough. And I think that delicate balance of like finding these tableaus that I mentioned before, but doing them in a way that still felt like character driven as well at the time. It was an ongoing topic of conversation through the shoot, but like, what we weren't, I guess, to answer your question is like, we weren't just observational, and we weren't, purely like docu-driven, sort of like find a perspective from this corner of the room and like just let the action play out and follow the action. We were sort of very much more like deliberate with our camera lensing choices and blocking choices that felt a little more grounded in character and being with someone with a character. So like that probably is what we weren't. We weren't sort of just like, like sometimes like call it some different things, but like slice of life sort of fly on the wall perspective stuff. We were a bit more like with people at times, which I like. I mean, it's kind of it's a dance between the cast and the camera, and your relationship with the cast is paramount in that way. And we had a fantastic cast, obviously, and it was amazing to sort of collaborate with them in that way, to not just sort of, okay, cool, camera goes in the corner, light over here and here, here, and just like let them have the floor. We did that to a point, but I think they I think they would feel the same way. Like the camera was with them through these scenes, and played a role within capturing their moments within performance in a way that felt like the camera just had a role to play within that performance as well. Not just sort of like, yeah, I'm sitting here watching Carey Mulligan perform a great scene. It was like, no, I'm going to interject myself as a filmmaker within that sort of argument, let's say, for example.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, because my earlier Finchurian thing, I misunderstood you. I wasn't 60% in. I was a little bit more 20%. Too observational in what I thought you were saying.
No. But it's a balance. I mean, the show is many things. So no, I don't think you were wrong at all. I just mean to say like I bring up the high angle thing to say like that's where it broke, and I think that's where it felt like that was a step in the wrong direction. And then you adjust, and you find like how to maintain an idea that makes sense for us. And, I was, raise my hand and say I was trying my best to sort of push that sort of tableau language, maybe more than others in a way. And it didn't work initially. And I think like there was adjustments had to be made to sort of make that make sense. And, bringing the camera back down to sort of eye height or hip height, depending on where it made sense in the space. But like, that's where it sort of clicked all of a sudden in a way that made those moments feel right.
It's funny that you mentioned that. So again, I've been working with the same documentary team, the like same director, producer. They switch jobs depending on the movie for the past like 3 years. And but we shot like 5 things in 3 years, and so I forget even. But the language kind of is the same for this team. They all kind of but it's a good Venn diagram between the two main guys. But to your point, I'm 5'9". I'm not that tall, and I'm handheld a lot, but I don't like being on the shoulder. So I naturally just have in my natural language is a little bit up,
low,
either eye light or hip height. Like somewhere chest height, Sure. And those two guys all want eye or up. And that's been a fun, the B angle on any interview is always like here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's funny what makes sense for people and what drives choices like that. And that's kind of the fun part of the job. But yeah, it is interesting when you sort of get into these, like, you think left, I think right conversations, and when the perspectives are disparate that way, maintaining the collaboration so it still makes sense for everybody it's hard, but I find that juice is worth the squeeze. That's kind of where some of the great stuff comes through.
Oh yeah, I mean, and for me, it's like I would much rather learn someone else's language and fold that into my own than to just go off and be repetitive. And
that's the joy of the job. It's why I think it's one of my favorite parts of the thing. So why not? Yeah.
I guess the hour's on pretty much up, but I'll let you go with one question.
That's great. All good.
I did want to go back to lighting just briefly.
Please.
Because I'm always very fascinated by how people can achieve, like you're saying, these sort of heightened reality looks. These very, like we said, they're stylish. They're not stylized. Especially the stuff that was not in a set. But were your lighting plots incredibly complicated, or was it kind of just like overhead fill, sun through the window, maybe a little bounce? Like how much money do I got to spend to steal your look?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like, let's see, how do I describe this simply? Like I would suggest my lighting style is pretty simple. I don't think it's like crazy complicated. You walk onto a set, like on an interior room, kitchen, dining room, let's just say, for example, there's probably like 2 or 3 stands on the floor, and that probably is it. As an example of like how delicate some of the things are. You know, I'm a fan of like, I'll put negative fill or, you know, some black duvetine on a wall that's on the fill side to sort of make some contrast happen. I'll put, you know, like a light mat or some other LED bounce version or something like that over a lamp that just kind of wraps that sort of incandescent bulb shape around it a bit differently and with a bit more strength. And then I'll sort of glow up some windows in the background. That's kind of generally, and I'll do that like, you know, I'll do that technique a few different ways through the room. Like if the room, I'm just thinking like, as an example, I'm thinking about like Ashley and Austin's apartment in this show. And, you know, I do have a top light into the ceiling that's like an LED source to get some ambience in that space that I can control and dial in the level, and that's usually wrapped underneath with some muslin. But then on the deck, there probably would be like, there'd be like a light mat floor or the like of some kind of light like that, again with some muslin on it probably, and that's wrapping around other motivational source, whatever space that might be in the room we're in, and I'm trying to block the scene with the actors to sort of make that make sense for everything, and they're not just standing in the dark the whole time. And that's generally what I'm up to. Trying to be like, a lot of my work has been luckily enough with some great performers and some incredible cast members.
Oh, this cast is insane.
It's insane. I know. Yeah. And so this is an great example. The work I've done, I've been lucky enough to sort of also work with some great people. And I think like when I think about that and going into prep and lighting plots and things like that, I know very well I'm going to just mess with them. You know, I'm going to mess their world up if I'm going to be putting up too much stuff and asking them too many favors. Can you look over here and can you do this? And so I try to be pretty delicate and dance around that to a point. Of course, if there's something inherently going to be insane, I put it in a request and I say, hey, do you mind? Or whatever it might be. But I try to be pretty delicate with them because I know the success of the show or film or whatever I'm making. No one cares at the end of the day if the performances aren't killing it, and no one cares about the backlight or whatever the fuck I'm doing, like that needs to work first and foremost. And then if I can continue to press upon my voice and continue to push my own work to help elevate and help to pursue the goals of what the show is telling narratively, that's great. But I definitely want to make sure my world isn't messing up their world in a way. So I'm pretty light on my feet in a room. I think anyway. I'm sure there are people that are lighter than me, but I hope I'm pretty light.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to hear that, because that's where my brain has kind of been going. And especially now that, we don't have to shoot film anymore. So you don't actually have to blast a room with,
sure.
10,000 watts of light to get something.
It's funny, man. I've been shooting film more than like in the last year than I've been shooting anything else, which is really weird. It's kind of, as you already said, it's coming back and people are more interested in it. But what's funny about it is I don't know that I have been blasting light in a way. I think it was like I used to. I know what you're referencing, but I feel like I've got a little more confident and not so anxious about exposure in those ways.
Yeah. Well, I was just given this, so now I have to. I happen to have 8mm rolls in my refrigerator for whatever reason. My friend's like, I got a Bell and Howell. Do you want it? So now nice. I'm going to have to relearn how to shoot. Although 8mm is probably not.
You'll be fine.
Super 8.
You'll be fine.
That's gonna be hard. Everything, it's just 5 pixels just dancing around. All right. Well, I will let you go. Thanks a ton for chatting with me.
Pleasure, Kenny. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Take care, brother.
Enjoy. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production, produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to frameandrefpod.com and clicking on the Patreon button. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.